Horizons. Haven Horizons is a national domestic, sexual and gender-based violence prevention centre. For the benefit of anyone joining our Lunch and Learn for the first time, these weekly sessions were developed as part of Haven Horizons' virtual community of practice, which brings together academics, frontline professionals and others involved in the field of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. Our community of practice promotes collaborations and the sharing of knowledge and resources. Members and non-members are welcome to attend the weekly Lunch and Learn sessions on Teams. The link is posted regularly to our social media pages, as well as within the community of practice. You can share this link with any colleagues who are interested in the prevention of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. If you're interested in becoming a member of our community of practice, you can email me on training@havenhorizons.com for further information, or we will drop the link into the chat shortly. Recordings from our Lunch and Learn sessions are available on our YouTube channel and in the Lunch and Learn section of the virtual community of practice, so feel free to comment on the sessions and share your thoughts. You can also keep up to date by following Haven Horizons on our social media platforms or visiting our website on www.havenhorizons.com. Today we are delighted to welcome Lorna McCormack to talk to us. Lorna is a businesswoman, educator, activist, European Climate Pact ambassador and Project Dandelion partner. As a dynamic and relatable speaker, Lorna fosters connections with audiences by sharing actionable insights, personal stories and a vision for an equitable and sustainable future. Lorna ran for nomination in the Irish presidential election this year. Her message about creating connection and inspiring change resonates with all who care about the planet and the role of women in leading its future. You can connect with Lorna either on our community of practice or by visiting Lorna's LinkedIn profile at the address on the screen. And Lorna will now share some insight with us into her work, highlighting some of the links between climate change, activism and gender-based violence and abuse.
I am a EU Climate Pact ambassador and I have been for the last year. And my role really has been looking at climate change based on the textile industry and working with children and breaking down gender norms as well within agriculture. So I have found myself going into other roles, and this is particular one of the roles that I'm very interested in is gender-based violence. I am as well a survivor of coercive control from when I was very younger, at a younger age, inexperienced, but have a knowledge and understanding of that and how it affects women. So using climate change, really, I think at the moment we're more looking at the effects of climate change when it comes to the land, to businesses, that kind of thing. So I just feel that when we start looking at women and how it's affecting women, we do know that more women are affected by climate change than men. So today, this is a very broad topic and it needs to be discussed. But when we're looking at women in relation to climate change, we also have to look at the minority groups. We need to, as we're looking at this, look at deaf women, women with disabilities, women of older age, maybe pregnant women as well. So there's lots of other things that we need to actually consider when we're talking about gender-based violence against women. And in relation to climate change. So the title here is How Climate Change Fuels Gender-Based Violence. And I use the word fuels based on the fact that we are very much focused on fossil fuels as well. And that is one of the things that I feel is affecting the issues regarding women and climate change. So bear with me for a second. So here we have I know we only have 15 minutes, so I will go through this quite quickly. But I do believe that climate change is probably one of our biggest crises at the moment. And we are in a crisis within a poly-crisis. That's the way I see this. And gender-based violence is actually a major factor when we look at climate change. By 2090, we will have 40 million women and girls who will likely experience either intimate partner violence each year if we have an increase of 2 degrees in our warming. So that scenario will actually increase if we get up to the 3.5. So this is a pandemic in a sense as well. It's our own pandemic that we need to be looking at further. So women are always at the front lines when it comes to any kind of climate change. So I have just a little diagram here on the different kind of climate disasters that we may see that we are very familiar with. So we have heat waves, droughts, wildfires, anything water related, floods, storms, surges, sea level rises, and then wind related hurricanes, tornadoes. And then, of course, we have the other climate events that we don't really hear about, like blizzards, dust storms, and then the slow kind of evolving kind of climate change with sea levels, our nature and biodiversity loss. So they all actually affect women. And you're probably wondering, how does this affect women? So first of all, I'd like to kind of look at the barriers when we have any of those kind of disasters. What are the barriers from escaping these disasters? And when we look at it, this is kind of very a simple kind of look at these the lack of funding is a very serious issue in relation to women maybe who have trying to maybe develop their own businesses, or there's coercive control as the control of the money and the funding. There's the land rights as well, so that could go back to the funding, access to support. So land and funding can, especially in women in agriculture, access to warning systems as well. So I suppose when we're looking at this kind of barriers to escaping disaster, we're looking more at the global south. But we do still need to take into account rural communities, anybody in Spain or Portugal with relation to heat waves as well, any kind of farming, women in farming as well. And then the cultural norms that we do see within different cultures where women might not have access to certain decision making, that goes back to control of money, and then education. Again, these are the other kind of barriers for women: lack of training, lack of education, and it even comes down to simple things. Sorry, going back there. Sorry, even comes down to the likes of maybe not having access to phones and radios. So the early warning systems mightn't be there for them. I may not have access to that. So, there's so many different issues in relation to that kind of having access, and the barriers that are affecting women from escaping any kind of disaster when it comes to climate change. Sorry, I'm going to move to the next one. So we see an awful lot in relation to displacement. And women who are displaced, and when we think of this, we think of immigration. So if there's a disaster, whether it's flooding, heat waves, whatever kind of disaster, crop yields failure, because we know that women who have crops, they're probably 4.5 times their reoccurrent rate by 2030 of having 4.5 times more crop failure by 2030 because of heat waves, because of biodiversity loss and funding, and probably access to services as well. So more women in the global south would be connected to the agricultural side of things, with small yield farms as well. So back to the displacement then, when women are displaced or lose their homes, they have to go into areas where there's overcrowding. And all these here, like lack of privacy, poor lighting, they all contribute to women gender-based violence against women. So when we have competition for resources, for food, water, anything else, that then kind of exacerbates the gender-based violence or attacks on girls and women. And of course, in these areas, there's the lack of the healthcare. So if you have women who are pregnant, during normal healthcare during period time and like that, that access to healthcare is not there, and this can cause all these issues or lack of services when women are displaced can affect women for, in relation to global or gender-based violence, and also, I suppose, intimate partner violence as well. So we do see that happens too as well. I think for me, migration, I think that's something that is on the minds of everybody at the moment. And when I hear people talking and giving out about how we see all the men coming into the IPAS centres or economic migrants, and that people are not looking at or asking the questions as to why we're not seeing more women. And I think, if we really did a deep dive into any climate disaster and the migration of women, we will see that more women stay behind. They don't move because it's nearly better the devil. And because they know that their risks of moving across any continent, they have risks of obviously gender-based violence, but trafficking as well. They could be, because of any issues in relation to there's economic abuse, forced marriage in relation to any kind of migration as well. So there's lots of different issues when it comes to women migrating, and it's easier for men to move across continents than it is for women. And then women, when they do move or when they do come to different countries, there are integration barriers. There's, the language barriers. They have more responsibility for family and childcare. So there's isolation. And when there's isolation, then we have intimate partner violence. And again, during migration, we have the same issues of privacy, lack of sanitation and healthcare, and all the other issues that we might have had and seen previously as well, with, poor lighting in certain areas, just the higher risk of women traveling through and trying to, get away from any kind of climate disaster. So in a way, it doesn't have to be that severe. So if we look at women in rural societies, whether it's in Ireland or in other Europe countries, there are, the risk of flooding, the risk of fire. And in those cases, when something like that happens or farm yields are destroyed, the stressors that put on families can then, kind of reduce or come to the gender-based violence in families. So it's not just one issue, it's not just one cause either. It's a accumulation of so many different issues within the climate disaster, and how the supports or the lack of supports that are there for people. And also, I suppose, for women, the lack of decision making within cultural norms is a big issue too, and how women are perceived in certain areas, or what the expectations are of women. And sometimes the expectations of women are high because they're caregivers, or they're bringing in the money. And if they're bringing in the money, or not, I should say, bringing in the money, that can cause intimate partner violence. And one of the issues in Africa is, I don't know if many of you know about hawking. Hawking is where women go around the streets and they sell their wares. And what's happening to women, because it's not legal, it's their only way of actually, providing for their family. But because it's not legal, they are threatened by police. They are imprisoned by police. They may be imprisoned for a couple of weeks and then back home again, and then the cycle continues. So again, they're subjected to violence and threatening behaviors and intimidation by the people who are supposed to be protecting them. And then they go home to probably more intimate partner violence as well, in relation to the lack of food, or the stressors that were put on the family. So there's a lot of issues that are there in relation to climate change and the effects of women when it comes to different disasters or perception of what women should be doing. One of the things I think as well is we don't consider, when we're talking about climate change and women gender-based violence, or any kind of violence, we don't think of the women who are out there defending our climate or defending biodiversity or defending something specific in their own countries or their own communities. We do know now that I think it was COP29, I'm not too sure, that started bringing in Indigenous voices into the climate change, and how we can bring those Indigenous voices in to help and support any issues in certain communities and countries. But when we look at the defenders, and if you look at the numbers there, since 2012, we have had 2,253 killed or disappeared just for defending their own communities in relation to climate change. So in climate action, I suppose. And 1 in 5 of those women, one of those five of those defenders are women. And a lot of the time, those stories are not reported. We don't hear about these kind of things. And we need to highlight these issues for how climate change and the defenders and any women, how it affects women. So, climate defenders they're affected by, the worst is death. Of course, there's intimidation and violence, and that spans, there's quite from one end to the next. But we really need to start looking at those figures. Obviously, we're not having those kind of effects here. It's more in the likes of the global south, South America, the Philippines, India, those kind of areas that are affected severely at the moment. But we have to look at the responses by the communities, responses by these people who were intimidated by businesses, not necessarily by the government, by businesses who are going to gain from, whether it was destroying deforestation or whatever. And it's the businesses that were intimidating the women. And then community might have come up against the women because of they didn't want the changes, or they wanted the finances to be put into the community. So we need to keep this in our minds, that women as climate defenders are more affected by intimidation. And we do know that women, are intimidated for voicing a lot of different issues, whether it's in politics or, climate change or any kind of, women are targeted, intimidated, harassed because of their views. And it's the idea that women shouldn't be thinking like this, that women need to be, kept quiet. But more and more women are at the forefront of change. And it's fantastic to see, especially as a partner of Project Dandelion. I mean, there's huge work being done by women for women. And, a lot of even women in faith, I should say as well, are pushing forward in a lot of things. And we had recently the 10th anniversary of the Laudato Si, Raising Hope. And I think raising hope is one of the things that we have to hold on to, that there is hope, and there is people focusing on empowering women. So how do we do that? I mean, we know that we need more women in leadership. That is really something that's really strikes a chord with myself, especially when I currently ran for nomination for the presidential election. One of the things that was told to me that, whether you had the backbone, and I feel that if we lead with empathy and kindness, we can also lead with strength and courage. And I think we need more women leadership in politics so that we can bring up the issues related to women, because we do still need men as agents for change, but we also need women's voices. So another thing for empowering women to how they respond to climate is access to education. Access to sustainable energy, also, I suppose, access to transport, things like that, so that they're prepared for any disasters. Then we also need protective, safety, safety systems put in place for women who, whether they're climate defenders, especially, there needs to be safety systems put in place to ensure their safety, whether it's online or policies that are put in place in different countries to prevent gender-based violence. Then, of course, we have to look at economic empowerment, and access to finance and land rights really is important. And I suppose innovation, green technology, those things need to be there for women. More and more women, in fact, women are born innovators, born creatives, so more and more women are actually moving into innovation, which is helping them to prepare for any kind of climate response or any kind of climate change within their communities. So we see an awful lot of that around the world now, where women are really innovating and starting to get that economic support and finance. But I do think that we need to encourage more women to, or not encourage, but to ensure more women have land rights. That is something that in Ireland, we need to actually look at more as well, because we have less women owning farms than the men. So that is just something that we need to look at and encourage more. But I suppose community action is very important, supporting women's entrepreneurship. That has to go forward. And how that's done, I think we have less support in social enterprises, and I think we need more support when it comes to any kind of social enterprise, and that it doesn't have to be always focusing on the capitalism system, and also that kind of patriarch system as well. And I know the biggest issue really is we need to start moving away from fossil fuels, and how that will happen is again back to innovation. And I think women will have the answer when it comes to innovation. I'm going to stop there because this is just really the basics of the end. The only way that we can inspire change is if we listen, amplify our female voices, but also include men as agents of change. I do think we have to maintain our own values, and that we're not pulled away from our own values, because that is something that happens for women. Invest in girls and women and ensure that more women are at the table. I hope that helps give a little bit insight today on climate change and gender-based violence. Thank you. And also, every issue is a climate issue.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Lorna, for that very stimulating and thought-provoking presentation.